This that's odd. Some reason, like from Discord or wherever showed out. Um, yeah. What is recent cryptocurrency? Something is definitely up with YouTube there. Mm, it's like adding millions to everything. It's just like the hack, right? Um, yeah, that's good. So what's this out?
But for us, what matters is how this gets into our reaction function. So I'm talking about expected inflation, the long end of interest rate curve. So we had somewhat of a steepening of the interest rate curve. We had a devaluation of the currency. But for us, what matters is expected inflation, both implied inflation from the markets and expected inflation from the surveys. Those have gone up.
Yeah, I mean, President Lagarde, you have described the path to 2% as bumpy. We got an inflation report in the Eurozone this morning, 2.5%, not too bad. But 4 was high, and services are still above 4%. So what is keeping prices so sticky?
Well, first of all, we had, as you said, a number that was lower than last month. So we said it was bumpy, and it's proving heading in the right direction for the indicator that we use, which is HICP, to measure inflation and to set our target. So that's good. But we still believe that it's likely to be a bumpy road until the end of 2024. But we still have targets at the end, in the second half of 2025, on the basis of our projections, and the baseline is unequivocal on that front. You are correct that services hasn't budged. So services is at 4.1, if I remember from the numbers that we got this morning. And obviously we are very attentive to the components and what is behind services. And the real issue is to understand whether those are, this is caused by sort of permanent changes, or whether it is also a factor of the lag effects of other components which are finding their way more slowly and gradually into services. And the jury is out as to exactly what it is. The truth of the matter is that we do have a service number that has gone slightly up in the recent months, and which is now staying at this 4.1 percentage points. Now, obviously, we don't need to have services at 2%, because manufacturing goods are below 2%, and at the end of the day, it's going to be a balance between goods and services, and it depends on the weight of those within the index. But we have to look really what is behind it, and what's behind it is a lot of wages. Services has a very high component of labor. Wages also suffer from the lag impact of the labor system that we have in Europe, where clearly bargaining agreements are negotiated not only on an annual basis in some countries, but sometimes on a triennial basis in other countries. So you have this catch-up effect. You know, for those people whose renegotiation took place early in this year, they had not had a negotiation of wages in the last 3 years. In the meantime, of course, inflation went up and their real wages went down. So there is an element of catch-up. So we need to really unpack all that to get to the root causes of inflation behind services. So we'll continue to look at that. We need data. It applies to wages, it applies to profits, because we are seeing profit gradually declining compared to the height where they were at the end of 22. But we need to see those profits absorbing the wage cost increases to make sure that the second round effect is out of the window and services are also going to be on a declining path as well. But services is the difficult one.
I was just going to pose that Taylor Swift is touring Europe this summer, and there tends to be an inflationary effect on services. Am I right, Chair Powell? We saw it last year, didn't we?
It's not just Taylor Swift, you know, others have come as well. Yeah.
I don't know. I saw her lately, and there was a lot of spending going on. No, but how do you look at the services, the stickiness of the services inflation, and how tied it is to wages, which have been rising?
You know, famously, services inflation is stickier, and famously it's tied to wages. I would say, so look at the U.S. labor market. We've seen a pretty substantial move toward better balance than we had a couple of years ago when labor was in extreme shortage. So what you see now is an unemployment rate that's moving back up toward a more sustainable level. You see wage increases moving back down toward a sustainable level of wage increases, inflation, and productivity, and you see, vacancies to unemployment ratio coming back to where it was pre-pandemic, and so many other measures I could mention. So that's what we're seeing, and so the labor market, wage increases are still a bit above where they would wind up in equilibrium, but nonetheless, you can see the labor market is cooling off. Appropriately so, and we're watching it very carefully. But it doesn't look like it doesn't look like it's heating up or presenting a big problem for inflation going forward. Indeed, it looks like it's doing just what you would want it to do, which is to cool off over time, not quickly, not suddenly, not steeply. It's kind of what we've been hoping to see and have been seeing. So, and services generally they're such a mixed bag, particularly non-housing services are a mixed bag. Some of what you're seeing is catch-up inflation from inflationary pressures that happened earlier. That's true with insurance. It's also true with housing services inflation, where you've got some pent-up rent increases that have to work their way off. It turns out it takes more than 1 year for that to happen. It takes several years. So we see all that in train. And we don't see ourselves getting back to 2% inflation this year or next year, but maybe late next year, but in the year after. The main thing is we're making real progress.
Can you keep cutting President Lagarde if he keeps holding? Does it make it harder?
Well, look, I'm going to give you the conventional response because that's the conventional question you asked me. We do take into account the spillover impact of whatever is decided by other esteemed colleagues. And obviously my esteemed friend, Chair Powell, is one of those. So we take that into account, but we also determine our monetary policy on the basis of what we see in our economy. And we look at the data that we get, the impact that multiple factors have on our economies and its numbers.
Does it matter for you, President Pappas, what the Fed does next?
Well, I think it matters to an extent, but I think there is one point that is worth mentioning, which is more recently we've seen a sell-off of some of the EM, and especially the EM that had more, there were like more than the best cases for investment. And you see that this is being explained with local news. But when you have a lot of sell-offs in different markets and they're all explained by local news, you have to ask yourself if there is a more fundamental factor driving that. And I think there might be. It's difficult to make the case right now, but definitely what we see now is there is more risk premium in a lot of the emerging market countries. And it was very synchronized with the long end of the US curve, and that correlation broke. So we've seen the last couple of weeks that even though the 10-year yield is more or less stable, even actually going a little bit lower, we saw a bit of a sell-off in emerging market countries. And I think that has to do with the fact that as you go for longer with higher rates and much higher debt, you start extracting liquidity from the market, and eventually you are repricing that liquidity. It could just be a temporary adjustment in EM, or it could be the beginning of a more profound movement. We need to wait and see. But I think the correlation between the U.S. Treasury and some of the EM has been broken in the last couple of weeks. And I think we should pay attention to that.
What about the fundamentals of emerging markets? Because the economies seem to do better during this hiking cycle than they have previously. Why do you think that is, and does it continue?
I think most EMs did a better job in terms of, or at least an equal job in terms of anticipating the process and starting the hiking process. Also, in the fiscal part, on average, emerging market countries spent more or less 10% of GDP facing the pandemic. Advanced economies spend a little bit more than 20%. So I think there is also this thing which didn't happen in the past, which is by and large, emerging markets were able to deal with the pandemic spending less. And actually, when you look at the fiscal post-pandemic, emerging market continues. It's not the case of every country, but continues to do a little bit better. So I think that also change the dynamics. And one other thing is, I think, the independence of the central bank and the maturity that a lot of the central banks have gained in the emerging market proved to be very useful during this process of the pandemic.
I mean, all of your economies did better than expected with the interest rate hikes. Wouldn't you say, Chair Powell?
Yes. I think particularly, I mean, many forecasters had a recession for 2023, which not only turned out to be wrong in the case of the U.S., we had well in excess of 3% growth. So.
But you still see policy as restrictive.
Yes, we do.
How restrictive?
Well, so that's kind of an empirical question. So I guess I would say, if you look at, we do think policy is restrictive, and we think that's appropriate. I think if you look at the labor market in particular, you're seeing demand for labor gradually come down in the form of job openings, and now a slight softening in unemployment in the form of wages. You see demand coming down, not just the supply that we're getting, but also demand coming down. You also see the effects of high interest rates in the housing market and some other interest rate sensitive things. So you see that, and I think I do think that restrictive policy is working hand in hand with this broad supply side recovery we've had, where we've seen the unwinding of the shortages and bottlenecks from the pandemic. We've also seen a recovery in labor force participation among prime age individuals in the U.S., and then some immigration, which has also been a positive supply shock. So we've seen all those things work together to give us, really significant declines in inflation. At the same time, we've got a strong labor market and growth. This was it's a great outcome for the people that we serve, and it's one that we want to do everything we can to foster.
So why not just cut rates to protect it?
It's what I said earlier.
Is it a bigger risk? Sorry, I'll rephrase. Is it a bigger risk that you cut prematurely and inflation stays sticky, or that you wait too long and the economy loses more momentum?
That is the question, and so our answer to the question is we serve a dual mandate, right? And these two things are embodied in that mandate. The risk on the inflation side is that you move too quickly, inflation comes back, and we didn't really solve the problem, and then we have to go back in, and that would be very disruptive to the economy. So the other risk is that we wait too long. We understand that, and the labor market softens too much. Perhaps we lose the expansion. So needless to say, we don't want to do that either. So, but at the same time, so we've got to balance those two. And again, given the strength we see in the U.S. economy, we can approach that question carefully. But as I said earlier, though, you see, a year or so ago, we were talking about inflation, and our framework called for us to focus on the variable, the mandate that is further from its goal. that's not, they've come back much closer into balance. And a good way to see it is the beverage curve analysis that everybody talks about and looks at. We come straight down the beverage curve, but you're really getting to that place relative to job openings and hiring rates, where traditionally the beverage curve is flattened out, which would mean higher unemployment as a result of further declines in job openings. So we don't know, you can't know that with precision, but it's very much understood by us that we have two-sided risks and we have to manage them.
What about the recovery in the Eurozone? President Lagarde, it's also been pretty resilient, especially on the unemployment front. How confident do you feel in sticking this soft landing?
Well, we reached a level of confidence back in June when we decided to actually cut rates by 25 basis points. But as I said in the opening remarks, it's not something that is taken for granted, that is a given, and we're going to re-examine each and every step of the way whether that confidence is actually continuously reinforced in order to continue on that path. And the remarks by Chair Powell made me really reinforce my points about data, because we are navigating in this universe of one risk versus the other. But where data is so important, and data is so important because we proceed always with the burden of the lag of time, whether it's the impact of our policy decisions, whether it's the impact of wages, whether it's the sort of on-time data or not. All of that has to be taken into account and analyzed in details so that we can feel really confident that we can go forward.
At the same time, there are also political risks. Certainly, they're front and center. It was nice of all the authorities to make elections all happen this week, certainly in France and in England. President Lagarde, is there anything the ECB can do to shield the rest of the Eurozone from feeling any negative impact from a divided government in France or from whatever the result is of the French election in a negative way?
I thank you so much for your question.
It can't be a surprise.
Because I'm not going to comment on the political situation of any of the member states, particularly those that are facing elections at the moment. But obviously, the European Central Bank has to do what it has to do. Our mandate is price stability. Price stability is obviously relying on financial stability, and we are attentive to that because this is part of our job. And we will continue to do so.
Does the rise in French bond yields worry some at all?
These are the things that we monitor. This is part of the job. It's not particularly at this point in time. We do that all the time, and we are very attentive.
You have fought hard for the central bank's independence in Brazil, and yet now you are the subject of many attacks from President Lula, and so I'm wondering how you're dealing with that.
Attacks from me?
No. No, President Campos. Attacks from President Lula. I think he called you an adversary and an enemy.
Yes, well, I think as a central bank, you have to get away from the political arena and try to go on with the technical job. And I think what we did, is a living proof that everything that was done was very technical. So during the elections in which Lula was elected, the incumbent president, in his last year of mandate, we increased rates in a cycle that went from 2% to 13.75%. That's the biggest increase in rates in an election year in the history of any emerging markets. So if that is not a proof that you are independent and you acted autonomously, it's difficult to find another example like that. So I think all this narrative that the central bank has been political, I think we have to get away from that and explain what we're doing. And I think what we're doing has been very technical. The last decision was unanimous, and we now have 4 members in the board that were chosen by the current president. And I think what we need to separate it was what is the political narrative and what is the technical job that we need to do. And I think history will tell, time will tell, that the job was done in the best we could do with the data that we had at hand, and that was in the most technical way, and it was done in a group of people that actually analyzed all the data and that worked very judiciously to be able to get to the conclusions that we did.
Chair Powell, do you have any advice for him? You've been through some attacks from
I have no advice. I will say,
We'll say
though, to put it in my words, you know, we've been given this great responsibility and great powers, and really important that we get it right. And we've been told to stay out of politics and just do your job, and that's what we do. We don't try to get involved in issues that are not our issues, and in particular, we're just focused on our goals and getting through that. And if we do that and do it well, I will say in the United States there's very broad support for an independent Fed in both political parties on both sides of Capitol Hill and everywhere. I don't think that that's really a question, as long as we just are seen to be doing our job and staying on task at all times.
Can I say something?
Yes, please.
I think that there are countries where governors do exactly what Chair Powell said, and yet get blamed and criticized. And I think that for some it takes courage to do the job, in addition to being a good, excellent technical expert.
But I do wonder if you're concerned, because your term ends, President Campos, at the end of the year. And it doesn't seem like President Lula is going to reappoint you. So do you worry about the independence of the central bank?
So first, I was never up for reappointment, regardless of who won the elections, and I've said that from the very beginning. When I helped design the independence law, I actually tried not to have the reappointment possibility in the law. And for me, the reason was I didn't want that the president of the central bank, at any circumstance, would have any incentives to bend his knee in order to have any kind of re-election. So that we need to make that very clear. Secondly, there is actually a risk premium down the curve, and I think it has been elevated in the last couple of weeks as to an uncertainty of what happens when the next leadership or the next team takes place. But this in Brazil is done very slowly, because the president can change 2 directors every year, and we have 8 directors plus the president. So right now we have 4 directors that were appointed by the current government, and the last monetary decision was unanimous. So I think what we did in the last decisions proved that the group is very cohesive in trying to find a technical solution for the country. So I understand there is a risk premium and there is always this uncertainty, but I think the group that we have, which is composed of 8 directors plus a governor, voted unanimously, understanding that that was the best for the country at that time. And so I think I understand that there is a risk premium, but I think with time that risk premium will tend to decrease.
There are concerns in the United States about Fed independence if President Trump gets elected. There have been reports that he's looking at that issue. Obviously, you've been subject of attacks before. What is your level of concern about that?
I am not focused on that at all, and that's not just a talking point. I really think that we just keep doing our jobs. I mean, the U.S. economy, we have 4% unemployment. It's growing at 2%. Inflation's at 2.6%. Let's keep that going. Let's do our jobs. History will judge. I think if we can keep things on that path, that's what I'm focused on. That's the only thing I'm focused on. And as I mentioned, I do think support for the Fed's independence is very high, where it really matters on Capitol Hill in both political parties, among the leaders and most of the following. And so I worry about getting the job right. That's what I worry about.
I know you guys don't want to touch politics, but President Lagarde, it does bring into focus the fiscal policies, right? We heard President Campos say it. There are concerns about the deficits in France, if the far right should win. There are concerns in the United States about the deficits. So I do wonder if you have something to say or to warn on the fiscal front as it relates to making your inflation fight harder.
Well, fiscal matters enormously. true, and it matters in two different ways from my perspective. It matters from a sort of conjunctural type of way, and thank goodness the European authorities have agreed on the fiscal governance that will take over after the Growth and Stability Pact has been suspended and now completely replaced. So there is a framework within which members of the European Union have to operate, have to control the direction of their debt, have to make sure that it is sustainable going forward through the efforts that they deploy, and have to keep their deficit on watch with enough flexibility, and that's the second part of fiscal spending that I'm concerned about, with sufficient of an impact of a focus on productivity, on growth, of investment that will be conducive to both. And my hope is that in addition to operating within the European fiscal framework, which has been agreed by all European members, in addition to that, countries will actually look at the structural changes that they have to either continue to have in their arsenal of tools, but also that they will continue to improve going forward, because I regard that as critically important for productivity purposes, which we are lagging behind and have been lagging behind for a long time. So we're not so worried about fiscal expectations, as Roberto was saying, for Brazil or emerging market economies, but we're very concerned about the fiscal rules that have to be respected within the European Union, and the structural reforms that will be conducive, hopefully, to productivity improvement going forward, because that's the only way for Europe to actually remain strong and thrive in those changing circumstances and transformations that we have talked about.
And I know you're allergic to fiscal policy, Chair Powell, but I have heard you talk about the unsustainable debt burden of the United States. And even lately, there's been a sell-off in treasuries after increasing odds that President Trump will be reelected, that there might be a sweep of either party. Doesn't that make you nervous when it comes to the progress you've had on inflation if we do see more expansionary fiscal policy, more deficit, bigger deficits, bigger debt loads?
So I'm gonna give you the traditional answer to some extent, and that is that we just know fiscal policy is a job for elected people. We're not elected people, so we don't comment on it, and particularly in advance of a presidential election, we're not commenting on anyone's particular policies one way or the other. I will say more broadly, though, the United States is running a very large deficit at a time when we're at full employment, and it just is, the level of debt that we have is not unsustainable. The path that we're on is unsustainable. That's completely non-controversial. I would have thought that this is something that should be a top-level issue, and you do hear this from a lot of elected officials, but it should be a real focus going forward, is how do we get back to a sustainable path, because you can't run these kinds of deficits in really in good economic times for very long. I mean, I wouldn't say, I can't really speak to the time, but in the longer run, we'll have to do something sooner or later, and sooner will be better than later.
President Campos.
Yeah. Let's do a basic exercise. If you look at the total debt combined, just sovereign debt of US plus Europe plus Japan, that's 64% of the total global debt. That went, in terms of cost of service, that went from 1.2% before the pandemic to around 3.3% right now. But then you added 25% of GDP to that debt, which was the cost of facing the pandemic. So we have a much higher debt and a much higher cost of service the debt. So I think there is an aspect globally that is the extraction of liquidity that cumulative will have an effect in the market that sometimes is not pricing correctly. And if you think about what we have to do right now, we have to pay for the cost of the transfer programs that we did. We need to pay for the cost of the green transition, which is somewhat expensive. We need to pay for the cost of the fragmentation, which you look at the surveys and it's very costly for companies and for governments. We need to pay for the cost of the low-income countries that spent very little during the pandemic and now need support. We need to pay for the cost of demographics. And there's a surge in consumption of energy that needs to be paid because of the innovation. So we have a lot of bills to pay. We have a lot of bills to pay. We are at the highest level of that we had in a long time. And I think sometimes I stop and I think it's time for us globally to think about a way to get some kind of stable trajectory of the debt in the next couple of years. And it's not one country or the other. It's something that we need to do collectively because the global debt is very high and it's going to start taking a lot of liquidity from the markets. And the ones that will feel the effect are not the advanced economies, are the emerging economies, emerging market economies. And the low-income countries are feeling that effect already.
And you think the market is mispricing this risk?
I think the market was mispricing a little bit the fact that if you have higher rates for longer, the effect from extracting liquidity, depending on how much longer you're going to have these higher rates, I think the risk is higher than what the market is pricing us.
I also wanted to ask you, President Campos, about China, because you have a pretty good view. It's such a big trading partner for you. What's going on there? How much is China's economy slowing?
I'm not sure I'm very equipped to tell you what's happening in China. I can tell you that it's very important for a lot of emerging market economies. It's very important for Brazil. We are a very big exporter of food items and iron ore. So China is a very big trade partner with Brazil. And it has been for a while. Regardless of the government, it's important to understand that that is a very important tie to Brazil. The one thing that we look from looking from far away is we're trying to see what are the policies that China is doing, what is the focus, and what is the impact that this new policy will have for us. But because we export mainly food items and iron ore, we don't see that as a big threat. I think some other countries will have a different understanding of what this impact will be.
Yeah, I mean, there's also trade barriers that are going up. President Lagarde, tariffs. I mean, in our election, we're talking about potentially more tariffs. Are you seeing that in terms of growth and inflationary impact?
Well, we're not seeing yet more tariffs than what had been decided back, 8 years ago, and which was consistently maintained later on in relation to certain products. So that for the moment is stable. What is not stable at all is the number of protective measures. Occasionally, non-compliance with WTO rules, the level of disputes that are brought before the WTO, which is not in a position to resolve them because they are not equipped with the dispute resolution mechanism, and magistrates have not been appointed to that effect. We've had more than 3,000 trade protective measures decided in the last 2 years, and that is like 5 times what is the normal average of measures that are decided. So that's a concern, and it's a concern because trade has been fueling growth, and because Europe at large is not a small open economy, it's a large open economy, and trade restrictions are going to affect Europe much more so than other countries that operate without this degree of opening and vulnerability in a way. But the second reason I'm concerned about it is that typically trade is conducive to innovation. Innovation is necessary for productivity. And I think that the combination of reduced trade on growth and the impact of trade on the capacity to innovate and to improve productivity is a vulnerability for Europe, and one that we have to address very forcefully if we want to win this battle of productivity. And it's not independent from inflation. I'm not getting away from my topic, but it's one that is clearly a concern on the horizon.
And it could be inflationary. I mean, 10% across the board tariffs, Chair Powell, inflationary?
Of course, I'm not going to be scoring any potential political proposals which have been talked about. This is not our job to do that. Also, almost anything affects the economy. trade affects the economy, immigration, energy policy. Those are not our jobs. There are other agencies that do those jobs. We do maximum employment and price stability. So in our political economy, we stay out of that.
Right. But has implications for price stability, surely, and maximum employment.
Again, we're not looking to be, this is exactly what we're not looking to do, which is become players on issues like tariffs. I mean, because it affects, I mean, literally everything. All these things affect inflation and jobs, but notwithstanding that, there are others in the elected government who are responsible for trade policy. We don't comment, that's all.
Understood. So back to your job then. There is this debate among the Fed and other central bankers about where policy rates are going. R-star, the neutral rate, what that rate should look like, and whether it's different after COVID. What do you think?
Can we go back to trade? So, R-star. I guess I would start by saying that the thing that we write down as part of our summary of economic projections, and the thing that economists mean by R-stars, is a longer run concept. It's the rate of interest that would hold the economy at equilibrium at a time when we're at stable prices and maximum employment, and there are no shocks hitting the economy. So this is not the economy today. So the first thing to say is that when we're sitting in the boardroom in Washington thinking about whether a policy rate is the appropriate rate for this economy right now, we're not battling over what the long run R-star is, because this is a different economy. This is an economy that's still recovering from the pandemic. And so many forces are pushing it this way and that way, and there's really not a lot of precedent, so it's a very challenging time. But it's not, the question, the R-star question is a really interesting question, and that is, are we going to go back to the very low levels of neutral rates that we had in the recovery of the global financial crisis, or are we going to go part of the way back from today's high rates to that? And intuitively, most people think that we won't go back to those very, very low rates that we saw, during the global financial crisis recovery period. But we don't really know. I mean, the neutral rate has moved around, we think, by slow-moving, longer-run forces, demographics, technology, productivity over time, all of those things move it around, ultimately the balance between savings and investments. So it's a great conversation to have, but honestly, when we're looking at policy in the boardroom, it's how is our policy affecting today's economy, and do we think we're getting the results that we want? And by and large, in a world where this isn't a world of precision, we think we are. We're getting a gradually cooling economy, a gradually cooling labor market, progress on inflation, 4% unemployment, 2% growth. We're getting kind of what we would want to have. And so that's, I worry that some people, no one in this room, but some people think that the R-star debate is the thing that dictates our assessment of how restrictive policy is. It's really not. Unless you think that the long-run rate is the same as today's rate.
I think that investors are trying to figure out, though, where you're going to end up and what the policy path looks like once you start cutting rates. And it becomes important then.
No, I agree. It does. It's what will we discover to be, we'll find it empirically, what will we discover it to be. And I think there's a debate going on. There are people who feel very strongly that it hasn't changed and that it has changed. And ultimately it's unknowable. It does matter for the longer run. It matters for where rates will settle out, but it doesn't matter much for policy decisions today, which are the ones we're actually making.
I guess we want to know if there are like 10 cuts coming or 15 cuts. I mean, do you think President Campos has changed post-COVID? Are you dealing with a different economy?
So the R-star story for emerging market countries is a little bit different. So for example, if you look at, if you had a table of countries of Latin America, you would find that at least the models internally used by their own central banks, in some cases you had R-star going higher, like Brazil from 3 to 4.5, but in some cases you actually had R-star going lower. So the question is, what is the short-term view and what is the long-term view, as Chairman Jay described? And I think for us it's more like trying to understand what is the structural reason for the neutral rate in Brazil to be so high, 4.5% real time. It's really high. And I think a lot of it has a lot of structural elements from the past, but it has intensified during the pandemic. And you could go and talk about the amount of subsidized credit. You can talk about the trajectory of the debt. You can talk about productivity. For example, when you look at productivity, there is one thing that not a lot of people talk about, which is in the need for raising money, sometimes the adjustment is done on the revenue side. When you do the adjustment on the revenue side, if you look at what's being done in emerging market countries and even in some advanced economies, you tend to go back and tax capital more than labor, because it's very hard to tax labor coming out of a pandemic. If you tax more capital than labor, and this has already been happening for a while now, globally and especially in emerging market, then you introduce another element that will bring productivity lower. So when you look at the causes of the neutral rate to be so high structurally, that's I think what we need to work on. And Brazil has done a lot of reforms. We have done reforms, and I think if you compare to other European countries, Brazil was actually able to do reforms in the middle of the pandemic. We did the social security reform, we're doing a tax reform, we did the labor reform, all in the middle of the pandemic. But still, when you look at the efficiency of what was done, the end result seems to be that our structural rate is still to our neutral rate, our star is still too high. And I think we need to go on and talk about what are the reforms that are needed in the medium term to make sure that we have a structural rate, a neutral rate that is lower than we have right now.
President Lagarde, do you ever see a world where we get back to near zero interest rates, absent a crisis?
Do I think we're heading towards that? That's, in my view at this point in time, it's very unlikely, but it's not something that I would want to pass judgment on. What I can tell you is that when we start having that conversation that Chair Powell described perfectly well and that I would completely subscribe to, I would be relieved. Because it would mean that we are getting closer to where we need to be. It would mean that we do not have any shock suffered by the economy, nor on the immediate horizon. So that would be good news. But we are certainly not at this stage, and this is not the work that we do when we set our policies going forward.
One thing that's been moving fast and has the potential to impact economies is generative AI. And I know we started talking about it a little bit here on stage last year. It was early. But things have moved, President Lagarde. So how are you thinking about any impact on growth or productivity or inflation of what's happening in technology?
Well, Sarah, that's a subject for which we need another hour, because there's so many questions about it. Number one, there has to be some regulatory framework within which AI and generative AI in particular, especially if it's in the hands of a small oligopoly of companies, is actually organized in order to protect a number of rights and protection of citizens. I would start from that, which is not where we are for the moment. Although there are attempts to organize in a better way, as was the case with internet, on a global basis, the use of generative AI. So point number one. Point number two, and I will let Roberto talk to that point because he's more of an expert than I am. The question of how much energy is used in order to test large language models is really something that is not often in discussion, and yet it matters enormously. Third, the impact that AI will have on growth, on inflation, on productivity, I think is yet to be determined. I think most people would agree that it will have an impact throughout the ladder of jobs in most segments of the economy, in areas where mechanical developments have not historically affected jobs in particular. And it will require significant amount of training and constant upskilling of people so that they can adjust to artificial intelligence, use it, and not be victims of it. I would add to that I think we at the ECB are using artificial intelligence, try to do it in a safe environment without being hostage to those companies that would like to have access to the most private of our data. So it does require a cautious management and enough control without preventing the innovation and the creativity that people can apply in the use of these tools.
You use it in models? How do you use it?
We use it in models, we use it in, whenever we need a lot of language mining and whether it's structured or unstructured data for that matter, we use it, and we are constantly pushing the frontiers of that. But as I said, cautiously, because we need to protect data, and we need to make sure that there is enough human judgment involved in the process of this use of artificial intelligence, so that we are not either hostage to the mechanics itself.
Do you think that fears over generative AI, Chirpal, rendering certain jobs or industries absolute are legit? And is there anything the central bank can do?
I don't think we know. So you see this massive investment boom. You see, serious people in the private sector and the public sector. There's a sense of something big coming here. And it feels like what that will be is it will eliminate some jobs, will create some new jobs. And the question really is for many people who will it augment their labor and make them more productive, or will it eliminate their job? And I just don't think we know that. It's too early to say. There's not a lot a central bank can do about that. This is really a job for. We can supervise our financial institutions and things like that to make sure that that they understand what they're doing with all different kinds of technology. But also, like everybody else, we're meeting with all the experts and asking ourselves what will be the effects on productivity, on inflation, on growth, and will it be enormously displacing, and if so, of whom? This one thought is that it'll be more people doing white-collar jobs who are writing press releases and things like that. So we just don't know. It's something we're investing a lot of time and effort. We're not using generative AI. We're very carefully looking at that. Other earlier forms of AI are in fairly common use in American business, and I believe we use some of that.
What about you, President Campos? I know you're focused on the energy needs as well.
Well, first I think when you look at the surveys that we have plenty now on the use of AI in companies. What you have in terms of empirical evidence up to date is that the companies that use AI to enhance existing labor have had better results than companies that have replaced labor for AI. So that's something that we know. It doesn't mean that some jobs won't be replaced by others, as it was said. But I think what we need to understand is what we are seeing basically is an increase in the ability of processing data and storing data. So it's basically computer power and the ability to store data. And that's very energy consuming. You have a couple of dimensions that you need to look in. You look at privacy, where is the limit, and what is the taxonomy of using this once it becomes a global instrument. What is the taxonomy of using this? Because you could be talking about data centers being placed in countries that have cheap energy to produce services for countries that have more expensive energy. So once you start crossing the frontiers, thinking about how you're going to do this movement globally, I think there's a lot of consequences, and one of which I think is you're going to have very unequal growth between the countries that are more on the edge of producing this technology and the countries that are not, and the energy consumption also will be very unequal. So I think globally we need to look at how we're going to connect the dots and create more or less a taxonomy for this development to be sustainable.
In the minutes that we have left, I want to do sort of a quick lightning round of questions. Mainly, we talked about opportunities, we talked about economies. What about the biggest risks facing your economies? And I do wonder if they're the same or different. Chirpal, what's the biggest risk facing the U.S. economy right now?
Yeah, I mean, I traditionally have said cyber risk to that because it's we know how to deal with credit risk. We know how to deal with lots of kinds of risk, market dysfunction, things like that. But we haven't really had a big successful cyber attack on a financial market utility or a bank. And that's the kind of thing which I think is the stuff of lying awake at night. I would also, today, though, honestly, really, it is just the balance that we talked about, getting the balance of monetary policy right during this critical period. That's really what I think about in the wee hours.
President Lagarde?
Same thing.
Really? Really? Cyber risk?
I think, I'm saying that touching wood, actually, and I wish, because it's one, if you ask if you ask the financial sector, if you ask banks with which we interact a lot, sometimes much to their chagrin, but eventually to their satisfaction in the long run, I'm sure, because we supervise them carefully. But typically, that's a risk that they flag as one of their top priority risks, and on which I think we need to constantly improve the level of coordination, first, second, third line of defense, and best way to respond to those. Now, clearly, I'm concerned as a person more than as president of the ECB about the backlash that there is against the fight against climate change, and some would argue that it has nothing to do with central banking, but I would contend that this is actually not the case. It does have a ramification impact that we should be mindful about, but it's a risk that is there, and that will come to haunt us if we don't do much about it.
I thought you were going to say geopolitical risk. That's there too, right? Facing Europe?
Geopolitical risks as defined by Maurizio earlier on? No, who was it?
Yeah, Moritz.
We heard a lot about geopolitics.
It's there, and it's just on the doorstep of Europe. When you look at this horrible war against Ukraine, it's a major risk which is out there and which is hurting those on the ground and the neighboring countries in particular.
What's your biggest risk?
If you look at what markets price today, they probably, at least for part of Yemen, especially for Brazil, the conclusion would clearly be that the main risk is fiscal. But I think that comes and goes, and it has to do with growth and productivity and a lot of other things. I think there is one other risk that I see, and it's not very tangible, which is the polarization that we live today. If we think about the amount of time that we spend on some social issues that are connected to polarization and that are not that meaningful to produce well-being of the society, I worry a lot about that.
Yeah. So if we're sitting here on stage in 1 year from now, which we hopefully are, the inflation rate in the U.S. will be,
Mid to low twos.
that's kind of, we're mid-twos now.
Yeah, well, we have 1 month at 2.6. And, we had a brief visit to the low twos at the end of, but I mean sustainably, durably underlying inflation between 2 and 2.5 is what I would say. That would be a great outcome.
Headline PCE.
Yeah.
President Lagarde, 1 year from now?
1 year from now, I would say low twos. We are at 2.5 latest reading, and as I said, bumpy on the way ahead, but yeah, low twos.
You've been closer to 4%, President Campos, right, lately. So where do you think you are in a year from now?
Well, I won't be in the central bank right now.
We already established that. Yeah.
But I think that the work that's being done is very technical. I'm confident that it will continue to be that way. And I think when you look at expected inflation today, I think it has a disconnect with the current inflation, and it has a disconnect with the fundamentals that we have in Brazil. So I'm confident that the future inflation will be lower than the expected inflation. In other words, I think what the market is pricing today is not in sync with the reality.
What about the unemployment rate? We're going to go full job line.
Yeah. I'd be happy if it were just right where it is now. That would be a good outcome. Plus or minus a couple of tenths would be good.
Is that likely?
Yeah, I think it's reasonable.
Starting to rise.
It's moved up from 3.4. We touched 3.4, so we're up to 4, but 4 is still a very low level. It's been a long time since, if you take, the last time we were at 4 or below for this long is, I was a teenager, a long time ago.
Also, unemployment rate in Europe has been, what, healthy, 6.5%?
It's historical low, and I hope it stays there a year from now.
What's the unemployment rate in Brazil?
Well, it's close to 7% now. It's very low when you look at our history. I think probably we will go up a little bit, not too much, but I think what we need to look at the participation rate. So we just published a study that shows that the transfer programs have an impact on the participation rate. Our participation rate was down, and then it's recovering a little bit at the margin. And I think it would be very important to understand what is the dynamics of the participation rate going further.
And finally, Chair Powell, were you a two-cut dot or a one-cut dot for 2024?
No comment.
Thank you very much, all of you.
Thank you.
I tried.
So thank you there for such a wide-ranging and fast-paced discussion. And we even managed quite a few jokes, even without Governor Wade here this year. So well done, guys. You really helped end the first day of Sintra on a high. All that's left to say now is please join us all downstairs where we'll be taking the group photo. Thanks a lot, and please join us again for day 2. Thank you.
Hey, Tom, I want to get to our next big guest. This hour joins us exclusively to talk markets, crypto, and so much more. Galaxy CEO Mike Novogratz. Mike, it's so good to see you. I want to talk about all those things, but I want to start with something else, which is politics. And this debate, you have been a backer of President Biden, and I've seen now a tweet that you put out. Politicians are narcissists, you write. They even make hedge fund managers look humble. I guess given this lens, it's not surprising that Biden is still running, but damn, it's sad. Tell me how you've been thinking over the past week.
Well, listen, over the last 2 years, I've literally been saying we need to move on from this generation. I pledged at one point no one should vote for anyone over 72. And listen, it was clear as could be in that debate Joe Biden is too old to run. And people have been saying that for a while. There's been a bunch of people behind the scenes trying to get something to change. And I thought afterwards it would be pretty clear. But it looks like they're doubling down. And frustrating. You've got one candidate that lied halfway, almost the whole way through the debate. The other candidate that had a really hard time making it through the debate. And that can't be the best America has to offer. And so, listen, I mean, the markets, the yield curve sold off pretty aggressively and steeply. I think the markets see some certainty, but I think there's probably more uncertainty because we'll see if Biden actually lasts to the convention. There's
CNN, fact check Biden, and I think there are 40 lies, Mike. So I mean, that's a nice talking point, but there are.
Listen, it was the worst debate.
So it's a presidential who lied, and it's another guy who has no idea what's going on, but he's still lying. So
it was the worst debate in presidential history. And that's, we're not in a good place.
Let's just go back though. You've been a donor, I believe, to Biden. I remember you came on the air a couple months ago and talked about going to a lunch with a bunch of folks. I think it was actually an effort to try to find somebody to replace Biden. I don't recall exactly where things stood. My question to you now, though, is, do you believe there seems to be a doubling down, and at least those folks around the Biden camp are looking at the donations and the big headline that just came out last night and this morning about how many donations were made in the aftermath of the debate and saying, this is our guy. My question to you is, from the donor class perspective, to the degree you think it has any influence over the future nominee, do you believe that there's a crowd of people that are going to this president and saying, we're not giving you money, we're not voting for you, what's going to happen here?
I know there is. There is a bunch of donors that are furious, that are trying to use all their levers of pressure they can. Listen, it's interesting. People isolate themselves. It's his wife. It's a small group of people around him. It's time for Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer and other senior Democrats to start speaking out and putting pressure on him, because otherwise we're going to lose. It doesn't feel like a smart strategy when 72% of the American public says we think you're too old to run for president. That's not 70% of Republicans. It's 70% of the electoral base.
Mike, were you just willing to go along with it before Thursday, or?
No, Joe, I have been.
Okay, you haven't wanted him for a while, but you've been giving money to him.
I have not given Joe Biden any money on this in this 4 years. I gave him money last time, and I've given money to other. Listen, this term I've given money to Democrats and Republicans, right? I need to support the crypto industry as well as the rest of my beliefs.
That's what I was going to go with it. As a guy in the crypto business, one of the things that's been fascinating is to see former President Trump come out quite publicly as an advocate for crypto regulation, and all sorts of things, even in the past couple months. Has that switched your view of it?
Program. Get with the program. You're a businessman.
Okay. Mike,
I'm not a single issue voter, and I do fundamentally believe crypto should be bipartisan. It needs to be bipartisan. We can't have one party that likes this and the other party that doesn't. And I would tell you that most Democrats, outside of Elizabeth Warren and a small group of people, are pretty pro-innovation and pro-crypto. And so it's been unbelievably frustrating. That's all shifting. And you can listen, no matter who wins the next election, we're going to get positive crypto legislation. I know that.
Playing from desktop.
It's you. Cool.
Playing from desktop.
It's a little break while I go message this. Actually, can I just keep it here? This thing should have an option to just hide like a specific window. It should be something like that. Like this. Guys, let me just sign off for the day. All right, so kind of to just give you guys a quick recap, like we beat in the title, we're doing an AI scraper, right? Basically just goes to various articles and kind of scrapes them, cleans them up. um you know or client for the agency asked us to do this. So that's kind of the backstory. And of course, you can see we're using ChatGPT heavily today. This is the first time I got to the limit of 4.0. So yeah, it's pretty cool. I don't think we could have done all this so quickly without ChatGPT's help. So shout out ChatGPT. Yeah, I don't think AI is replacing. I don't think AI is replacing coders anytime soon. Well, for one, there are just gonna be some. When I talk to people who like would be replacing us, they just don't want to sit. They have no desire to sit at their computer for many hours. So even if it's like one line, they it should like they're just not gonna have any desire to sit here and like figure out the right prompt and whatever. So worry not, AI is most likely not stealing your job if you are a web developer or any sort of developer. Honestly, people just have their preferences. But as you see here, it can be quite helpful. Um, helped us to fetch what over 1,000 plus lines of clean data. And 3 or 4 iterations of code that we wrote, and you guys gonna see how we built out that whole program, like with the aid of chat GPT from version to version, right? And this is kind of like what the cleaned up data looks like, that I guess will go in some AI model. All right, guys. But if you did, if you were here, thank you for sticking around. Thank you for checking us out. Oh, let's check on the status of our trade before we go. We were when last we checked. I decided I was gonna just stay short today because to me this whole week should be bearish if anything, and I think that means we are in the money actually. You see, could be we got stopped out. Trade massively profitable. So I'm just gonna go and move this stop down again to above this 60K level. All right. We're staying short as long as we like, and this week should be bearish if the Germans are really selling, but it could just be chopped. So, but whatever. But that's how that went. And yeah, guys. Remind, if you do want something like this, a website, web project, web scrapers, bots, etc., don't email down below king.xanda@gmail.com. Reach out to me, my email, and me and my guys will get it done for you. All right, maybe you will make a feature on the channel if you want, right? And reminder, guys, I always gotta shill the ultimate DEX course is out. All right, so that's newwebdesignsinc.com/DEX course. Link in the description down below. Show you how to create your own DEX from existing code, real guidance on like how to do this stuff, multi-chain. So if you want to go on to another chain, how to set up create around your own token so you can use that as adding value for your community. All right. Join the Discord. Again, link to the Discord will be down below. All right. Ultimate DEX Course 50% off. Yeah, you guys know what's up. But that is it, guys. That's been it for our day of coding. All right, doing our AI, getting rate limited by ChatGPT for doing our AI, doing our trading. Maybe we should make an AI trade, but it's probably be way smarter than us, right? Um, I recant the idea, but yeah, so that was already coding. Pretty productive day, guys, and I will catch you guys later.